In this video, we are going to walk through the May-June 2018 paper 2 for English A. Alright, so first we'll start off with the summary section. So to read through the instructions, you must read the following article on bullying carefully. List 5 main points discussed. Then write a summary of the article in not more than 120 words. If this limit is exceeded, only the first 120 words of your answer will be read and assessed. Remember to include in your summary paragraph the 5 points you listed. As far as possible, use your own words. Your summary must be in continuous prose. You may use the space on page 5 to jot down a plan. So in your answer, you'll be assessed on how well you identify the main ideas and opinions in the extract. Organize and express these ideas and opinions in your own words. Use appropriate grammar, sentence structure, vocabulary, spelling, and punctuation. So let us read through our summary our extract. So it goes, typically, bullies and their victims share the same characteristic: low self-esteem. Whether they internalize or externalize their feelings determines if they become bullies or victims of bullying. Usually, negative situations and events in a child's life can trigger low self-esteem. Externalizing feelings of pain or discomfort or worthlessness, which start in the home, can cause some children to become bullies as they seek to control their social environment to compensate for their lack of control in their family. For instance, if parents of a child are separating or divorcing, the child might feel responsible for the situation or powerless to keep the parents together. Frustration and anger develop. As a result, the child might take out the anger on others to compensate for the lack of control over the parent situation. Other children internalize their feelings by refusing to talk about how they feel. Instead, they become depressed and withdrawn, and see themselves as failures or lacking in some important way. When a bully attacks such a child, the attack validates this child's feelings of inadequacy, so the child often reacts negatively. Accepting or confirming the negative self-validation because he or she feels the bully is correct. Children with high self-esteem do not respond negatively to bullies because they already know that negative personal statements made by the bully are untrue and therefore unworthy of attention. The main goal of bullies is to get their victims to experience fear, anger, or sadness. Once their victims demonstrate these emotions by words, actions, or body language, the bully has control, and the bullying will continue until the victim no longer responds in the desired way. Words and physical responses can hurt, and ignoring the bully does not work. One strategy is to diffuse bullying. To diffuse bullying is to help the victim to understand the power of words. Parents should discover what words the bully uses. Discussing and understanding these words can rob them of their strength, and the victim needs a supply of less attacking words to help diffuse the situation before physical violence starts. In addition, the child being bullied needs to remember that if he or she retaliates using the same words used by the bully, the situation will get worse as the bully will respond in kind. It is very easy to feel sympathetic towards victims of child bullying. However, it would be more helpful to the victim if we try to empower them to counter the bullying. Success at this will help restore their own self-esteem and strength. This has been adapted from Brian Davis, Bullying Prevention Skills for Children in the Next Generation article, magazine or journal, Carib Creative Solutions Limited, 2009. So, that is our extract. And these are the 5 main points we came up with. Bullies and victims often share the problem of low self-esteem. Children may become bullies when they externalize pain and anger, often because of problems at home. Some children become victims when they internalize their feelings, becoming withdrawn and insecure. Bullies continue when victims show fear, anger, or sadness because this gives the bully power. Victims can be helped by being empowered, especially by understanding hurtful words and learning how to respond calmly. So when we put all of this together into our summary, we get bullying often develops because both bullies and victims suffer from low self-esteem. In some cases, which is a connective, children become bullies by expressing pain, anger, and frustration outwardly, especially when there are difficulties at home. In contrast, which is the connective, others become victims because they keep their feelings inside, become withdrawn, and feel inadequate. Consequently, which is the connective, bullies gain power when victims react with fear, sadness, or anger, so the abuse often continues. For this reason, which is a connective, a useful way to reduce bullying is to teach victims how to understand and weaken the effect of insulting words instead of responding aggressively. Therefore, which is a connective, rather than only pitying bullied children, adults should help them build confidence and self-worth so they can deal with bullying more effectively. So this is the summary we have, and we added in our connectives to help the paragraph or the summary flow. Now let's take a look at the next section of the exam. So this is the expository section. It says, study the situation presented below and then complete the task that follows. So we have, you are the manager of the National Museum. You are to inform patrons via the museum's mailing list of the recent changes at the museum. One of the changes to be implemented is the hours of business. Museum will now be open Monday to Thursday from 8:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. and on Friday and Saturday from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. The rates at the museum will also change. Adults will now pay $15, senior citizens $7, and children under 12 will pay $5. The museum's offerings will now include guided tours, which can be organized for parties of 6 or more, and the viewing of paintings by noted artist Dunstan Saint-Omer. Patrons of the museum will now be able to purchase tickets online at the website www.nationalmuseum.com. The security of patrons will be enhanced with the installation of closed-circuit television cameras or CCTV cameras. So now we must write a letter which will be sent to the patrons informing them of the changes. So it is important to read this entire scenario carefully as well as the instructions that they give at the bottom telling you what kind of writing to do. Sometimes they tell you to write an email, write an article, write a notice, but now we have to write a letter. So your answer will be assessed on how well you formatted your letter, selected relevant and complete information, organized and expressed the information in your letter, used appropriate grammar, sentence structure, vocabulary, spelling, and punctuation. And last but not least, your letter must be in continuous prose. Okay. So let us take a look at what the letter looks like. So this is a formal letter. We know it's a formal letter because we are the manager of the museum and we are writing to our patrons or customers. So due to that, it is a formal letter. We are not writing to somebody who is familiar or friendly with us. Okay, although it is a formal letter, because we are writing it to a whole group of people, we are writing it as a part of a mailing list. We do not need to put the recipient's address because we are not writing to any person directly. We are writing to a group of people. So we will only put our address. For our address, we have the National Museum, number 5 Frederick Street, Port of Spain. They did not really give us any locations or addresses in the prompt, but we could just make up one. It's pretty simple. Then we're going to write our title, which is Recent Changes at the Museum. Now let's continue. So dear patron, we are starting the letter now. And we said dear patron because we're not writing to any specific person, so we cannot say like dear John, dear Jack. The management of the National Museum wishes to inform you of several exciting changes that have recently been introduced in order to improve our service to all visitors. So in our introduction, we are starting off by right away telling the audience or the examiner what this letter is about. It's about the changes. Now please note that our new opening hours are as follows. Monday to Thursday 8:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. and Friday to Saturday 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. We hope that these extended hours, particularly on Fridays and Saturdays, will provide greater convenience for our patrons. Now, admission rates have also been revised. Adults will now be charged $15, senior citizens $7, and children under 12 years old $5. So we're talking about the change in the cost or the fee. Now, additionally, the museum now provides guided tours for groups of 6 or more. Visitors will also be able to see paintings by the renowned artist Dunstan St. Omer. So we mentioned all the things they wanted, and we are also, if you notice, not really taking it word for word from what they have. We are changing up a few words here and there, or the structure of the sentences here and there. Next paragraph is, for added convenience, tickets can now be bought online at www.nationalmuseum.com. Security on the compound has also been strengthened with the installation of closed-circuit television or CCTV cameras to help ensure the safety of all patrons. And last paragraph, we thank you for your continued support and look forward to welcoming you soon. So in this letter, we have all the necessary things. We started off the introduction by giving them an idea as to what we're going to talk about. We give them all the relevant details. We also express thanks for something, which is thank you for your continued support. And we also express hopes of future interactions. So we look forward to welcoming you soon. And we end off with yours faithfully, John Smith, the manager. So it was a pretty simple letter. Now let us take a look at the story writing. Right, so your answer should be approximately 400 to 450 words in length. You must write it in standard English, however dialect may be used in conversation. In your answer, you will be assessed on how well you use the stimulus provided, develop and organize the content of your writing, use language appropriate to your audience, purpose and content, use appropriate grammar, sentence structure, paragraphs, vocabulary, spelling and punctuation. So we have two options. We have a man sitting at a table looking at all of his bills. We know it's bills because there's one saying amount due, and he seems stressed. Now number 4 is a worded prompt. It goes, they could feel the angry eyes piercing their backs, and then the door slammed. They made their way towards the waiting car. They were now on their own. Write a story which includes these words. So here we have a worded prompt, and this is the one that we are going to go with. And notice, they said write a story which includes these words. This means that you must state the prompt in your narrative or your story. You can't leave it out, you can't change it up, you can't do anything like that. You have to put it in. Whatever instructions they give you there, you need to follow. Sometimes they say start your story like this, or write these in the beginning. Sometimes they say put it at the end. Sometimes they say write your story based on these words. If they say based on these words, you don't need to include them. You just need to write a story that is relevant to the prompt. So let's take a look at our story. So it's question 4. This is our prompt. This is the whole prompt here. So the story starts from here. They could feel the angry eyes piercing their backs, and then the door slammed. They made their way towards the waiting car. They were now on their own. Rain had begun to fall, soft at first, then harder, drumming on the galvanized roof of the old blue car. Old blue car parked by the gate. Aunt June, who had promised to drive them to the bus terminal, leaned over and pushed open the back door. Come in quickly, she said, her voice trembling. We don't have much time. Joel slid in beside Mika, clutching the small brown envelope that held their birth papers, a little money, and the address of an uncle they had never met. Mika looked back once at the house that had been their home for 10 years. The curtain moved. Their stepfather was still there, watching. Everything had changed after their mother died. At first, he had only been cold and distant. Then he became harsh, always complaining that they were a burden. He muttered about bills, food, school books, and extra mouths to feed. For months, Mika tried to protect Joel. She washed, cooked, and cleaned after school. She kept silent when insult followed insult. But silence could not fix everything. The night before, she had overheard him speaking on the phone. Tomorrow, he had said, they have to go. I can't manage them anymore. Mika did not sleep. At dawn, she packed one small bag for each of them, and June arrived just after sunrise. She tried to reason with him, but his face hardened like stone. I've done enough, he snapped. Take them. Now, as the car pulled away, Joel finally spoke. Mika, where are you going? Where are we going? She swallowed a lump in her throat. To Uncle David in San Fernando. Aunt June says he will help us. What if he doesn't want us either? Mika looked through the wet window as the village disappeared behind them. Fear rose inside her, but Joel needed courage, not fear. He will, she said firmly, and even if things are hard, we still have each other. Hours later, they stood at the gate of a modest cream-colored house. Mika's heart pounded as she knocked. A tall man opened the door. For a second, nobody spoke. Then his eyes rested on the envelope in Joel's hand and the tears on Mika's face. You must be Marcia's children, he said softly. Mika nodded. Without another word, he opened the door wider. Come inside, he said. You are home now. At that moment, the fear that had followed them all day began to fade. They had lost one home, but at last he was opening another. Okay, so now we are going to go through the story a little bit more in depthly to understand all the different elements that we added. First, the opening of the story, which is they could feel the angry eyes piercing their backs, and then the door slammed. They made their way towards the waiting car. They were now on their own. This is the prompt that they told us to include in the story, so that is why we have that there. We wrote it in the beginning because the very first lines of the story must grab the attention of the reader immediately. Just like argumentative essays, the very first line in a story is also called a hook. So this particular hook that we used, it works in the story because it starts the story off with action. It doesn't start off boring. It creates tension right away, and it makes the reader ask several questions like, well, who slammed the door? Why are they leaving? And well, why are they going on their own? Don't begin your story with things like, one day there were two children and the sun was shining so beautifully in the sky. No, that is boring. Instead, start off your story with some action, some danger, fear, mystery, or some sort of strong emotion. You want to make the examiner want to continue reading your story. You don't want them to feel bored and just say, alright, this is a generic standard 5 story. You don't want them to mix up your CSEC level story with an SEA student story. So you need to start off strong. Then let's talk about the characters we have in our story as well. So the characters we chose would have been Mika, who's the older sister, Joel, who's the younger brother, Aunt June, who's the lady who came to help them, the stepfather, who is the source of the problem, and Uncle David, who is the person that offers the hope at the very end of the story. So the reason we chose all of these characters is because a short story should not have too many characters. You cannot write a short story of 400 to 450 words and have about 10 to 15 characters in them. Every character in your story must have a purpose. So Mika in the story, her purpose is the main character. The reader follows all of her feelings and all of her actions. Joel, he gives Mika somebody to protect in the story. Joel is a he. He helps to show that Mika is brave and responsible. The stepfather, his purpose is creating conflict or problem in the story. Aunt June, she helps the story to move forward by taking the children from the stepfather to Uncle David. Uncle David, his purpose is solving the problem in the story. So every character must have a job in your story. You can't have a character who just there, like sometimes you might be writing a story about a group of friends and you write 5 friends in a group because your friend group might have 5 friends. But then if the story only centering on 2 of those characters, what are the other 3 doing? One of them might just be existing in the story to say hello or just to have extra person. That's unnecessary in a short story. Every character needs a purpose. If they don't have a purpose, don't write them in. So when it is you need to write your stories, ask these questions about the characters. Ask, does this person create the problem? Does this person help to solve the problem? Or does this person reveal something about the main character? If they are not doing any of those things, then you probably don't need that character. Now let's talk about the setting of this story. So the story is set in a house in the village. We see that the rain was falling heavily because it said the rain had begun to fall, soft at first, then harder, drumming on the galvanized roof. There's also an old blue car. There's also the bus terminal, although we didn't talk very much about it. It's still a location in the story mentioned. And we have Uncle David's cream-colored house in San Fernando. So the reason we use this setting is not just because, well, it didn't have anything else to write, so we just write about that. No. The setting in the story is not just a place, it creates the whole mood. So, for example, the rainy village, well, the fact that it was raining heavily creates the mood of sadness, fear, uncertainty, and loneliness. When the rain is falling very hard in real life, those are the mood, that's kind of the mood. You tend to have a very down or gloomy mood. So when you write that into your story, it creates that mood for your story. You wouldn't write a sad story and the sun shining bright in the sky and birds chirping and children running around laughing. No. You could think of it as like a movie. When they want to set a scene in a movie, if they want something to be dark and gloomy and sad, rain would be falling in the movie. You don't see sadness happening and the screen bright and lively. Then the final setting, which is Uncle David's house, helps create the idea or the feeling of safety, relief, and hope. So when you have to write your story, don't just say they were at a house. You must add different details to your story. So add color, talk about the color of the house. The color of the house might be able to indicate something related to the mood. If you want a dark or a gloomy mood, you could say the house was blue. If you want a nice, bright, happy mood, you could have the house was a bright shade of red, a bright yellow, Talk about the sounds that you're hearing. If you're hearing loud thunderous rainfall, loud thunder, and anything loud and scary, you will create a very dark and gloomy mood or a scary mood. Talk about the weather, so the rain movement. So when they said that the curtain moved, it creates some liveliness in the story. Yes, we don't want it to be lively in the sense that happy and cheery, but we want it to feel like the scene is alive. In terms of the story isn't just flat like you're watching a 2D drawing. You want to feel like it's a movie that you're seeing playing in your head. So the conflict or the problem in the story now. So the main conflict in the story is everything had changed after their mother died. At first he had been cold and distant, then he became harsh, always complaining that they were a burden. He muttered about bills, food, school books, and extra mouths to feed. Right. So this here is the conflict in the story. The stepfather has become angry and bitter and depressed, and he no longer wants the children. So why do we have conflict? Every story needs conflict. Without a problem, there is no suspense, or there is nothing to solve in your story. There is nothing exciting. Nobody wants to read a story that's just happiness all the time. There must be some kind of problem or conflict. So in this particular story, the conflict is very strong because it is emotional. Emotional in the sense that the parents died, the mother died, and the stepfather doesn't want them, so the children are possibly on the verge of being homeless. It's also a serious matter. It affects the characters deeply, and it also creates uncertainty about what will happen next. As the reader, we also don't know what will happen, and the characters in the story don't know what happened either. So when you need to write your story, your conflict should matter. You shouldn't have a very weak conflict like she forgot her pencil home from school, or her cup of juice fell down. No, that's boring. You need to write some kind of strong conflict. So, for example, she forgot her speech on the day of the competition. That is strong conflict, because now the main character would be in a sense of anxiety or stress or frustration, not knowing what to do. So being thrown out of your home is a big problem, and the reader cares about that. So that is why the conflict works in the story. When you're writing a story, you also want to give some kind of backstory. So the backstory is the part of the story that explains what happened before the main events. In this story, the backstory would be that the mother died, the stepfather became cruel and cold, he complained about them being the burden, Mika tried to protect Joel, and she also overheard him saying that they had to go. The backstory helps us to understand why the children were leaving, why Mika is protective of the brother Joel, why the children are afraid of the stepfather, and why that moment for them having to leave is so painful. Without the backstory, the story would feel kind of incomplete. We wouldn't really understand why it is being kicked out or why it matters. We wouldn't understand that we should be feeling sad for them. Don't just dump all of your backstory at once in your story. You should blend it in naturally in the story, and instead of telling everything at the very start, so you don't start off just giving the backstory. That is boring. You want to reveal it as the story unfolds. It's like when you're watching a movie or a TV show. Sometimes they start off with the moment of the highest action. They might start off with somebody getting shot. Then after the person dies, well, no, not after they die, but after they're shot and they're laying there, then the movie or the TV show might flash back and say, okay, this is how I got here 24 hours earlier. And then they start off telling you what it has happened. So you could do that with your story as well. Always remember that a story and narrative is like a written version of a movie. When you go in your exam, just pretend you're watching a movie in your head and write that movie in your paper. That is what I used to do in the exam. When I was in school, that's what I used to do. I had a constant movie all the time, and I used to just write bits and pieces of that movie in any paper that I had to write. Now we also need to talk about the plot structure. So a good narrative or a good story has several parts. You have the exposition. So this is the part that introduces the characters, the setting, the situation. In this story, it is when Mika and Joel are leaving home. That's the very beginning. They are frightened and their aunt June is helping them. Then you must also have a rise in action. So this is where the tension builds up. In this story, it is when we learn about the stepfather's cruelty. Mika remembers overhearing him on the phone, the children leaving in fear. Joel asks where are they going, and the uncertainty grows about whether Uncle David will accept them or not. Then you also need to have climax. This is the most intense and important moment in your story. In this particular story, it happens when they both arrive at Uncle David's house and Mika knocks on the door. So this is the climax, because the reader is waiting to see, will he accept them or will he reject them like everyone else. So that is when we are down here. Then after the climax, you have the fall in action. This is what happens right after the climax. In this particular story, it is when Uncle David recognizes them and he opens the door wider. Then last, we have the resolution. So this is the ending or the outcome of the story. So in this particular story, it is when Uncle David tells them, come inside, you are home now. So when he says that, the fear begins to fade and hope replaces uncertainty in his story. Now let's talk about the dialogue. So some examples of dialogue in the story would be like, come inside, you are home now, you must be master's children. What if he doesn't want us either? So anywhere in the story where you're seeing double quotation marks like that is dialogue. So dialogue is used to make a story feel alive. It also helps to break up long paragraphs and lets the characters speak for themselves. In every story, your dialogue should have a purpose. Just like how every character has a purpose, every line of dialogue should have some purpose. So let's look at them together. So come in quickly. When Aunt Joan says this, it is meant to show urgency or create suspense. Show that something serious is happening in the story and they need to be moving quicker. Then when Joel says, Mika, where are we going? This is to show that he is afraid or he is experiencing fear. He doesn't know where he's going. Mika's reply is Mika's reply is to Uncle David in San Fernando. Aunt June says he will help us. So this is to introduce us to this character of Uncle David and also to let us know where they are going. So instead of directly telling us that the children are going to Uncle David in San Fernando, writing it into dialogue tells us instead of actually having to say it. So don't just add dialogue in your story for decoration, because every line is supposed to reveal some type of feelings or emotions from the character. It's supposed to help your story move forward, and it's supposed to show character in some way. Don't let your dialogue fall into things like, hi, hello, how you going, I am fine. That is useless. Your characters won't ever have to say that. In the CSEC exam, you only have 400 to 450 words for your story. That sounds like a lot, I know. But when you get into writing your story, you will realize that is no kind of words at all. So, use your words wisely. Then when you're writing your story, you want to have some kind of character development. For example, Mika is the main character in the story, and she is shown as someone who is frightened but responsible, loving, brave, and mature. This was built instead of the writer just saying Mika is brave. They never say that at any point in time. But we, the readers, are able to tell that because they showed us that throughout the story. So they show us that she packed the bags. If she was meek and small, she would not have packed the bags and get ready to leave. She also protects Joel. As somebody who is not brave, she wouldn't be protecting him. She also stays strong for him, and she speaks firmly even when she is scared. So she is scared when Joel asks, what if he doesn't want us either? We know that Mika is scared. Because it says fear rose inside of her. But she stands strong still, and she says he will. And even if things are hard, we still have each other. So don't just tell me the emotions or the feelings or the qualities or personalities of the characters. You must show them to the reader. When you're writing your story, you also want to create suspense. So this means you want to keep the reader feeling worried or curious about what will happen next. So how is suspense created? In this particular story, it is created by making the reader wonder things like, where will they go? Will they be safe? Will Uncle David take them in? What will happen if he refuses? So some techniques you should use would be have a strong opening. You could create some kind of emotional problem in the story. You have the uncertain journey. We are not sure where they are going. Joel's worried question of what if he doesn't want us. And when they reach to the door to meet Uncle David, it says for a second nobody spoke. So there was a pause. That pause is once again to create suspense in your story. So don't just right away say they went to their uncle and he accepted them. That doesn't create any kind of suspense. You should stretch the moment out a little bit. Describe what the knock was like. Describe Mika's fear. Describe the door opening. Pause before the answer. All of those things help to create suspense in the story. Then we also have the mood and the emotions. So the mood changes throughout the story. At the very beginning of the story, it is tense, sad, and fearful. Then coming down to the middle, it is more uncertain, emotional, and painful. And at the very end, when he accepts them, it becomes relieved, hopeful, and comforting. So a good story will take your readers on an emotional journey. Your readers should feel something when reading your story. You don't always should you don't always have to feel to cry when you read a story. Maybe you feel a sense of joy or a sense of achievement or happiness. But you should feel something. And don't keep the same emotional tone throughout your whole story. You don't want to keep your readers sad for the whole story or happy for the whole story. You want the emotions to change as the story develops. So at the end now, when he says, "Come inside, you are home now," this final reflection that hope was opening another home. That's what they said, right? So this ending works as the narrative ending should always feel like it has been earned. The characters in the story, they suffer, they struggle, they feared the worst. So the ending feels more meaningful that after all of that stress they went through, they now have a home. So it gives the readers closure, emotional relief, and a clear resolution. So when you're writing your story for the exam, don't just end it off with, "and that was the end." Instead, you need to end it off with a final action, a strong line, some lesson, a feeling, or even a change in the character's life. Don't end it off on a cliffhanger as well, because for the CSEC exam, they want to see that you could end your story. They don't want to see that the story going and continue, because it have no continuation for the CSEC story. It have to end there. So you must end your story. Now we are moving to the argumentative essay. So our argumentative essay, our prompt is, every secondary school student should be required to do community service as a condition for graduation. Write an essay giving your views on the statements. So it goes, secondary schools do more than prepare students for examinations. They also help to develop the values, attitudes, and skills students need to become responsible members of society. Students should be required to do community service as it develops their social responsibility, life skills, and connection with their communities. Firstly, community service helps students to develop a sense of social responsibility. Many young people are focused only on their own needs and ambitions. However, when students volunteer at a children's home, visit the elderly, clean public spaces, or assist at school events, they become more aware of the needs of others. This can help to build character and encourage kindness. Secondly, community service allows students to gain useful life skills. Students learn teamwork, leadership, communication, and problem solving. These are important skills that help them not only in school but also in the workplace and in everyday life. For example, a student who helps to organize a community project learns how to cooperate with others and complete tasks responsibly. Therefore, these valuable skills further show why community service should be compulsory. Thirdly, community service helps students to build a stronger connection with their communities. They graduate school without understanding the challenges faced by the people around them. By taking part in activities such as helping at a food drive, tutoring younger children, or assisting in environmental projects, students become involved in community life. As a result, they develop a sense of belonging and concern for the well-being of others. In conclusion, community service should be required in secondary schools because it helps students to become more caring, responsible, and capable individuals. It teaches them to think about others, develop important life skills, and build stronger ties with their communities. Therefore, community service is an important part of preparing students for life beyond school. Right, that's our argumentative essay. It might feel like it's long, but it really isn't when you have to write it. So the topic of this essay is, should secondary school students be required to do community service? And the side that we took is that yes, they should be required to do that community service. There. And why is it we chose this? Because in an argumentative essay, you must always take a firm side. You cannot sit in the middle and be unsure of which side to take. Take whichever side you have the strongest arguments for. And for us, it is the side of saying they should be required. In our introduction, we have the hook. Our hook and background information are actually merged together in two sentences, well as one compound sentence or complex sentence. but that's fine how we have it there. So the hook works because the opening introduces the broad idea about education. So it helps the essay to begin in a thoughtful way instead of just jumping straight into the argument. So it sounds mature. It also introduces the purpose of education, which is to help students develop the values, the attitudes, the skills, and it also just naturally leads into community service because we are talking about them becoming responsible members of society. The background information is part of it as well. Now let's move to the thesis statement. So our thesis statement is students should be required to do community service as it develops their social responsibility, life skills, and communication with their communities. So the thesis statement is supposed to tell you the writer's position, the topic, and the 3 points that you plan to talk about. Our topic is them doing community service. Our stance is that they should be doing it. And our 3 points is that it develops their social responsibility, their life skills, and connection with their communities. So we have 3 points there. Now going on to the body paragraph, the first body paragraph. So in the essay we have 3 body paragraphs. Notice we have the one that starts with firstly, the one that starts with secondly, and the one that starts with thirdly. So 3 body paragraphs here. They each talk about a different point. The first one will talk about social responsibility because that is the first point mentioned in your thesis statement. Secondly, we are going to talk about life skills as that is the second point listed in your thesis statement. And thirdly, we are going to talk about the strong connection within communities as that is your third point mentioned in your thesis statement. Every paragraph follows a clear structure of having a topic sentence, explaining your topic sentence, giving an example, and also linking back to the argument. So our first body paragraph, firstly, is our connective here. Community service helps students to develop a sense of social responsibility. So this topic sentence tells you the main point of the paragraph immediately, and it is also clear and direct, so it links back to the thesis. The explanation we have is, many young people are focused only on their own needs and ambitions. However, when students volunteer at their children's home, visit the elderly, clean public places, or assist at school events, they become more aware of the needs of others. So we are explaining our point here, we are explaining why it says that they develop a sense of social responsibility. You can't just drop your point, you have to explain it. So the explanation here shows that what many students are like before service. So how are they focused on their own needs and ambitions? Now it also shows how the service changes their thinking because they now become aware of the needs of others, and that why the change matters. It matters because children become aware. And we also give examples. So the examples would be things like volunteering in children's homes, visiting the elderly, cleaning public places, and school events. And then we had a closing sentence, which is, this can help to build character and encourage kindness, as it wraps up the paragraph neatly and connects it back to the topic or the thesis statement. Our second body paragraph now goes, well, our topic sentence is, secondly, community service allows students to gain useful life skills. So this is our topic sentence here. It is clear. We also have the transition with secondly to show organization. Anytime you start off saying firstly, you have to continue with secondly, thirdly, and so on. You cannot say firstly, in addition, then moreover. You cannot do that. You have to follow that in that particular order. And that's why we use it for this one essay. Right, so now our explanation in this paragraph is that students learn teamwork, leadership, communication, and problem solving. These are important skills that help them not only in school but also in the workplace and in everyday life. So this paragraph needed to show that community service is not only morally good but also practical. So this is important in an argumentative essay because strong arguments often show more than one kind of benefit, right? So the paragraph proves that the community service helps to build their character and also helps them with their future successes as well. The examples we give would fall under, for example, student who helps to organize a community project, learns how to cooperate with others, and complete tasks responsibly. So it shows how skills develop through action. It connects the idea of community service with real behavior. Then we have the linking sentence of, therefore, these valuable skills further show why community service should be compulsory. It just links back to the main argument of the essay. Now our third body paragraph. The topic sentence is, thirdly, community service helps students to build a stronger connection with their communities. So this introduces the point, and the explanation is, they graduate school without understanding the challenges faced by people around them. Yes. So this sentence explains the problem. The problem is that the children don't really pay attention to people around them. So it shows what could happen if students are not involved in community service. Then we develop it a little bit more by saying, by taking part in activities such as helping at food drives, tutoring younger children, or assisting in environmental projects, students become involved in community life. So this explains exactly how the students become connected to the communities by participating in the events. And our result, or the linking sentence, is, as a result, they develop a sense of belonging and concern for the well-being of others. Then the conclusion now. So all good conclusions restate the argument, summarize the main points, and leave the reader with a final strong idea. This conclusion does all three of those things. So it reminds the reader that the community service helps students to become caring, responsible, and capable individuals. Then it ends with a broad statement about preparation for life. So it says, therefore, community service is an important part of preparing students for life beyond the school. If you'll notice, throughout the essay, we had several connectives. We had firstly, secondly, thirdly. Then we have however, however, for example, therefore, as a result. So transition words guide the reader through the essay. They show how the ideas connect to each other, and it makes the writing easier to follow, or it makes it easier for the reader to follow. In an argumentative essay, it should sound organized, and transitions help the essay to feel structured and logical and organized. Without these transition words, the essay would sound very choppy and disconnected. Also notice that we did not use any statistics in this essay or any kind of expert quotations. All we used were practical examples. So we used things like volunteering at the children's home, visiting the elderly, cleaning public places, spaces, helping with community projects, tutoring younger children, or even assisting in environmental projects. For an essay for CSEC, it is accepted to use just practical everyday examples, especially if they are relevant and realistic. So the examples, they work well in the essay because they match the topic, they help to explain the point, and they make the argument more convincing. So you don't always really need big facts or to do a lot of research to write an argumentative essay. Just having simple, sensible examples will be effective. So when you go in the exam, if you cannot find a quote or a statistic, don't stress yourself. Just try to come up with a realistic example for that particular situation or context that you're writing. So this is the end of this paper. Thank you for watching the video.